Ben, thank you so much for finding the time to do this.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
I'd just like to kick off with the question that we start all of our discussions with, and that is, what's the wrong you want to right?
It's quite a big question. I think, certainly in terms of myself, it's probably to try and, solve world peace, probably from arguing a little bit less. But, in terms of when it comes to actually Influencer as a company, I think, being in such a fast growing industry, there's quite a lot of, new companies coming in. There's quite a lot of new advertisers spending on it. So there's a lot going on. And a lot of companies are just simply doing influencer marketing wrong. And that's often through things like, influencer fraud. That's often through things like, lack of regulation. And perhaps just using creators who aren't the right fit for the brand. And it becomes really difficult to pick the right creators, especially when you are working at scale. So one of our visions at Influencer is to build meaningful relationships between creators and brands. And we really do that through being basically underpinned by our technology. So we're really trying to make things right through both a data aspect, but also through creativity. So we say internally that we are championing a new era of creativity with influencer marketing. And we believe, through having the right strategy, you can really build some impactful campaigns. We also try and solve things like, ad regulation. We launched a completely free tool called advertaudit.com.
Yeah, I saw that.
Which basically allows people just to check whether their posts are compliant or not. I think there's quite a lot of confusion over what is actually compliant and what's not. So that was basically just built to do that. Influencer fraud, our technology can check whether creators have fraudulent followers, whether they're part of like comment pods, all of these interesting things. So we're really trying to, steer the influencer industry and educate the rest of the industry as well to go in the same direction as other players within the advertising industry are doing.
I guess really just trying to demystify something which is still very new and young.
Completely. I think that's the most important thing, right, is demystifying it when it is a very young industry. We're trying to do our best and trying, as I said, to educate. But I think it's important that, there are multiple players doing that as well, which is great. I've joined a body called the Business of Influencers, where there's people from our competitors who are on that, and it's about working collaboratively for the future of the influencer marketing industry.
And you guys are about 6 years old now?
Yeah, so 5-6 years old. Well, that's from really when I officially sort of set it up in my bedroom while at university, so all those years ago. But I'd say probably started to scale up in the last sort of 2-3 years, and that's when things really started to get into motion. But no, it came back about 6 years ago when set up in, as I said, university bedroom.
Because one of the things I was wondering was what's the sort of biggest change which you've seen throughout from your bedroom to now? What do you think's been the most sort of monumental shift in the influencer marketing industry?
I think the most, monumental thing has been, how different the sales pitch evolution's become. So right at the start, you were having to sort of educate people on the actual industry. So you're going to have to actually explain to them, what's a YouTuber, what's a creator, and even sometimes what's Instagram. Yeah. Now it's a case, you're going in, people are very clued up on it. And it's straight away talking about, the various strategies, the various types of data you can get. So that's a massive thing, which has happened over the last few years. On top of that, though, there's so many new platforms coming in and so many different types of content pieces on these platforms. Going back a few years ago, Instagram was solely, photos. Now they have stories, videos, IGTV. They're about to launch Reels. They've got multiple different, pieces of content forms and, other social networks as well, like Bytes, which is Vine 2.0 has just launched. TikTok's obviously done incredibly well. So it's really, just keeping up to date.
Yeah. And I guess you talk about the sort of level of understanding then. When you're meeting with CMOs or marketing directors, what kind of challenges are they coming to you with around influencer marketing? And I guess how receptive are they to it as a medium? Maybe much more receptive now than they once were. I guess what level of understanding do you kind of see in those teams and with those people?
Yeah, so the two main things often tend to be, number one, there's so much out there on what influencer marketing actually is, but what's actually correct. So it's helping them cut through the noise, essentially. So that's one of the main things. But in terms of, influencer marketing in itself, it's actually, how can we, I guess, track the return of investments? I think ROI is a really big part of that. And that kind of stems to the amount of data. So that's one thing which we really invest heavily in influencers. So we just recently brought on board the ex-head of data science from Kantar to basically help with some data insights pieces on tracking influencer content after the campaign, but also understanding influencers' personalities, brands' personalities, and helping build that more meaningful relationship between the two. I think as the influencer marketing industry grows up as well, we're working with more third-party integrations and more third parties as such as, working on Nielsen studies as part of influencer campaigns, done Humby, and other sort of brand uplift, which is really, really exciting.
I guess the more data you can offer to your clients or your prospective clients, the more justification they can make for investing more heavily in the channel, right?
100%. I think data is a massive part of the influencer industry, and it's why we've just opened up a new office in Kiev, which has really been just putting out developers there. They're all are in office, but it's really to scale up, to say, look, we know technology is the future. We need to be investing heavily into it.
I noticed that. So why Kiev? Well, I guess you probably had to decide between various places. How did you end up on Kiev?
Yeah, so Kiev's quite an interesting one. So Kiev as an actual city, I mean, when you're thinking about London, when you're thinking about what the core jobs are around like marketing, finance, Kiev, like the actual main job is working in development. Right. So the actual number of developers out there is considerably more than they are in the UK. So it means that, the costings are about 1/3 cheaper, and they're actually still the top, quality of skill that you would expect of those in the UK. So it's something which for us, it made it very competitive to be out there. Yeah. We've got a great team out there, and it's something which, as I said, we're investing heavily in especially the next 12 months to build up our technology. And I think, although I keep probably talking about technology and data, the most important thing is that although everything's underpinned by our technology and data, it really does come down to the strategy as well. Because you could have all the data pinning to which influencer to use, and how well a campaign's performed and all the rest of it. But unless the strategy is right, it won't have the impact which will actually produce the return of investment that the advertisers crave.
So I guess, let's talk about the strategy first. I'm sure we'll come back to the data point. I guess, am I right in thinking you guys work as a sort of managed service, but also as a sort of self-service platform where brands can just access your technology? Is that right?
So we have a completely self-service platform which allows for advertisers to come to Influencer and literally use it for creator discovery, campaign management, campaign reporting. And then we basically say, look, you can use the software that we use in-house to run your campaigns, or you can do it yourselves. So we also have, as I mentioned, the team in-house who do that managed service, and will run the campaigns from start to finish and deliver reporting to essentially how the advertiser would want the reporting. And that's when we can really work with those third parties I mentioned earlier as well, to really tailor campaigns for their fit.
And what would you say are the sort of key questions that you ask them when you're trying to scope out what a strategy might be for a client? What are the key questions that you're challenging them with, but I guess also challenging yourselves with? Yeah,
I think the biggest question always, with any sort of advertising campaign that's run, is you have to understand what success is, because a lot of people with influencer campaigns just suddenly say, oh, I need to spend money on it because other people are spending money on it, and then when the results get delivered, they're like, oh, that wasn't what I was expecting. I thought it was going to do this. And you're like, well, if that wasn't the brand actual KPI, then the campaign wouldn't have been targeted by that, because you can deliver an influencer strategy which can drive downloads. You can deliver an influencer strategy that can drive brand awareness, clicks, app downloads, and all the rest of it. So it's really important to understand what the success is like, so you can build out the strategy based on that. Because there are so many creators out there who are right for different styles of campaigns, and there are so many ones who are the right fit for certain brands as well.
Yeah. And when you talk about fit, then what comes into that? What makes for a good fit between an influencer and a brand?
I think the biggest word probably of 2019 is authenticity. So I can speak about all the right data fits, but ultimately that's data helping at step one. Then it does come down to the authenticity. is this something that the creator would actually use themselves? Is this something that the creator would actually want to encourage others, in person, actually about using? And that's where it really comes down to it. So it has to be that authentic relationship between the brand and the creators. I mean, a great example of a campaign is one we did with Vans. And they came to us with a brief, and they were like, look, we want to advertise people publicizing their favorite pair of Vans. And we said, that's great, but let's bring some emotion into it. We think, most people have a pair of Vans. So let's get the creators who want to be part of this campaign to submit stories to us about their most memorable moment wearing a pair of Vans. So we had some crazy stories about, the first time people got dumped, or when they received their exam results, or when they got their first job, all of these amazing stories, which then built that emotive narrative and actually gave that authenticity because it was speaking about a time when they were wearing their pair of Vans.
Yeah, and I guess that type of approach goes so much further, has such a bigger impact than just that product placement, thinking that just getting someone wearing your shoes or your bag is going to have a long-term impact.
Absolutely. I think, the campaigns where the creator's just holding up a product saying, go buy this, are long gone. And those campaigns just simply don't work. So I think it's about, as I said, building that or using creators who have that authentic relationship with the brand, and then partnering those up. And I think that's where creators are definitely themselves trying to actually build out their relationships. It's saying, okay, I don't want to work with 100 brands over a year. I want to work with 2 or 3 that I can really build out in my content and build up that rapport with my followers about working with this brand.
Yeah. I guess when it comes to the sort of creative then, I was just wondering, I've not been really exposed to this. What is the kind of briefing process when it comes to influencer marketing? Is that quite different to a kind of traditional creative brief you might see in a sort of advertising world? How do you approach that?
Well, I think what's quite different is the fact that you can build a base creative, but understand that you're not just putting the creative straight through an ad network where it's going to be straight away published. You're then putting it onto someone's audience who they've already got a relationship with. So the first key part is establishing, what's the top line creative that we want the influencers to actually work towards? But then the second part is, we need each of the influencers to be tailoring the content to what they usually post, because it has to be authentic to what their followers are used to, or else they won't buy into it. And they'll actually, probably feel a little bit cheated on otherwise. So it's about that difference, I guess, that you have to allow the creators to speak in their usual tone of voice, but based on a top level narrative.
And I guess are some creators better than others at just figuring out how that works? Or?
Yeah, 100%. I think those creators who stick to, being authentic, they're the ones who are going to win over the long run. The ones who will just publish a brand message based on what the brand said, they won't, because the followers will see straight through it. As I said, they'll feel cheated and they'll just start unfollowing. I think there was that great example of Scott Disick when he posted a brand deal with a protein company, and it said at the start, please post this at 4 p.m. EST. And then with the caption. Exactly. I mean, those type of things are awful, but it's just an example where it has to be in the creator's own authentic voice, or else the brand relationship with the creator won't be translated over to the followers.
And I guess so Caspar Lee is your co-founder, business
the absolute
partner.
Genius.
What does he bring to that side of things, I guess, from his sort of personal experience of scaling a huge audience?
It's so interesting. I mean, Caspar is one of the most intelligent blokes I know, because with Caspar, he sees stuff very deeply from creator angles, not just from the top level where he's at, but also from the smaller level as well. And I think where Caspar and I work really well together is obviously building an influencer marketing company. You need that balance between being brand first and also being creative first. You can't just be one necessarily or the other. So Caspar really has that creative first attitude where we're doing everything to look after the creators. And I'm honestly thinking about it from, looking after the advertising. It's about finding that balance. And, it works both ways, and it produces the impactful campaigns that we can actually deliver. Honestly, having Caspar's as well creative scope when he comes into these, creative brainstorming meetings definitely helps us produce the level of campaigns that we do produce.
And I was wondering, so obviously Caspar, for example, has built up his audience of millions over quite a lot of years, maybe like 10 years now.
Yeah.
Could you start, if you were to start tomorrow, how easy would it be now to scale an audience of that size? Or is it getting harder and harder for people to start afresh? If someone wanted to become an influencer, is it harder and harder now because the way those social platforms have already matured a little bit, or not?
So it's interesting. I think Caspar would say it's near enough impossible and that he got lucky. I completely disagree. I think, with the amount of hard work that went into it and the amount of commitment that he went through, it only seems that way because he got to that break to actually grow big. I think in terms of growing on YouTube now and Instagram, for sure, it's much more difficult. But with the rise of TikTok, now Byte as well coming in the frame, these are networks where there's real opportunities to become a star on there and actually grow audiences. And I think that's what TikTok are really actually trying to do, is actually create new creators rather than just transfer people's audiences from one social network onto TikTok.
I guess those new networks now, TikTok and Byte, for example, they're launching with the awareness of the social media influencer thing, whereas maybe Instagram and YouTube, it's like they're kind of retrofitting that kind of into their network. Like how much sort of attention do you pay as soon as something new comes on the scene, like TikTok or Byte?
I think with TikTok and Byte, I mean, they're both heavily funded companies, so that they're not going to just die, essentially, right? Yeah. So you have to take them seriously. I think when you think about TikTok, and Byte, it's short form content. And I think that's what people are really developing towards. I think, perhaps the days where people would sit down and prepare themselves to watch, a 20-minute YouTube video aren't as strong as when people can just watch a 6-second clip and absorb that content and then move on to the next. I think, we live in a world where people love just sort of, have very little attention spans. So it's great, quick fire content, move on to the next.
Yeah. I guess that makes it challenging creatively to get that message across if you're trying to get a brand message across.
Challenging, yes, but then it's creating new opportunities, and I think that's why new creators are able to build audiences on these channels, because perhaps some of the traditional creators aren't wanting to shift over to that because their content fits the networks that they're existently on.
Yeah. And I guess, so what are the networks which you predominantly focus on at the moment?
I mean, the main networks that we're still running campaigns on is, of course, Instagram and YouTube. With some of our best in clients, we stick still to Twitter. That's just because of more the reactive nature. And actually with, some of the TV shows that we work with, Twitter's very good at being, obviously, again, reactive. But, we are seeing the rise in TikTok campaigns, certainly. We haven't done a Byte campaign just yet, but no doubt an advertiser will probably ask next week, exactly. But no, it's exciting when a new social platform comes to the frame, because it's like saying, okay, how can we strategize the content to work for this network?
That's interesting you mentioned about TV. So is that working with a TV show to get their show trending and get discussion going around the...
Yes, we did a campaign with... BBC, which was around David Attenborough's Earth series. Right, okay. So that was really cool, about getting influencers to post reactive content to actually, watching that. Right. But it helps build up the audience there, get everyone talking about it as it's going live, and then get it trending as well to build up conversation just organically.
David Attenborough is probably like one of the oldest influencers.
Oh, he's an absolute
planet,
legend,
right?
Absolute hero.
That's quite interesting.
I don't think he'd do any sponsored content now, unfortunately.
I think he's maybe doesn't need to.
No, I don't think he needs
to dip his toes in the water. So yeah, I guess thinking about those different networks and maybe coming back to the data point a little bit, how do you understand audience in influencer marketing? Just for an example, so I was chatting with a colleague yesterday who was talking about the development of audience in paid search, and he was saying it's like gone so quickly from not really having audiences at all and just being keywords to then being able to sort of layer demographic stuff on top of your keywords, to now he's saying that is almost just gone when it comes to paid search, and it's just like you just need to let the smart bidding take control. But yeah, I guess obviously the influencer marketing space is a little bit different. How do you kind of understand audience when it comes to that?
Yeah, I think It's a really good question, because I think it's something which advertisers are certainly becoming more savvy to. It's not something which you book a campaign and you say, oh, I just want to book a campaign which goes to 1 million people. It's saying, okay, well, understanding who that audience is. I mean, just through the APIs, because we're connected to all the official ones, which definitely helps. So like the Graph API, we get the data on where they're from, the age brackets, the gender. So that's step one to actually narrowing down which creators you can target based on their audience. And then step two is we've got our own data layers on top where we can find out things such as interests, brand affinity, what the creators have spoken about organically in terms of brands, and which ones they've actually worked with in the past on a paid level. So these sort of things help build up a more complete picture of the creators. And something which I think we'll see a big push in 2020 is around first party data from creators. So this is not data which, again, you can absorb from their profiles. This is data which they've actually submitted to you. Okay. So that's where we really, hold a strong point over our competitors. Every single creator who's signed up to our network has expressly actually signed up to the platform. They've given us express use of their data through the APIs, but also they've answered a series of questions where we can understand a little bit more about them. So by finding out what newspapers they read, finding out how many times a week they go to the gym, you start learning a little bit more of a complete picture about who they actually are and what other interests you can depict from that data.
Very interesting. And I guess, so when it comes to those, to the API access then, are the likes of Facebook and YouTube, are they becoming more open with the data when it comes to this type of thing? Or?
Absolutely not. Absolutely. I think, it's really, really important what you're using the data for. A lot of people within the influencer industry, because it's very, very difficult to actually get that level of data, scrape the data, and it's not accurate data, because scraping only returns, say, 150 users at a time. So you're basically taking a sample size. For sure, you can keep updating that sample size, but it's not giving an accurate picture. So it's really important to get the API access to get that true data, and understand why and what you're using that data actually for. And we do it to build more meaningful relationships between the creators and brands, because we want the creators to be producing better branded content, which the brands can use. And, creators producing this content, we always say in influencer marketing, it's about 60% media spend and a 40% content creation spend, because these assets, they can be used across multiple different forms of advertising, from billboard adverts to paid social adverts to premium publishers. There's so much scope to where the influencer content can be reused.
Interesting. Well, so it's almost like you can that's part of your process when you're launching a campaign, is thinking much further beyond than just the series of posts or whatever that might be.
I think you have to, and I think with that in mind, it's about making it relatable for the advertisers who, the budget holders especially, about justifying this new form of, advertising costs where it can be linked in. So we're certainly seeing, the creator content being reused across multiple different forms of advertising. We did a really cool campaign with PepsiCo for Arto Water. Okay. And the content pieces got reused across multiple different tube adverts, bus adverts, which was really cool to see. And I think it really empowered the creators as well to see their content being up and about there.
Yeah, interesting. And then I just guess coming back to my colleague, Harry, asked me to pose a question to you, which is quite interesting around the data side of things, which was how much insight can you get into the audience's actual intent? So here's kind of asking, obviously some people just have so engaged audiences that they will get engagement on their post, well, he argued, regardless of the content, which I'm not sure whether I completely agree with. But I guess how much insight can you get to a level of, well, I actually know that the audience of this person are going to go beyond that. They're actually going to visit the brand's website. They're actually going to buy something. Yeah,
it's a really, really good question. It's very timely, actually. So obviously, as I mentioned, that we'd hired, I think I mentioned, the head of data science from Kantar to be doing some insights work for us. That's exactly what we're doing, is understanding the comments much more. Do they show purchase intent? Do they actually show a positive reaction to what the creator's posting, or is it just emojis? So we have to understand that. And it's not just about positive and negative sentiment analysis, because that's just one stage. It's actually understanding, okay, as you said, do they show a a purchase intent.
Yeah. Right, it's an interesting project then.
Really interesting project.
Yeah, interesting. I guess just coming back to the sort of agency as a whole then, I presume quite a young team?
Yeah, a very young team. Well, I mean, it's a team of multiple different ages. I think it's a young industry.
Yeah.
And we've definitely got some experience within it, as well as having, some more junior people who have perhaps come and join it as their first job. But it's really exciting for us because we've only ever had one person quit Influencer.
Oh, wow.
And 3 weeks later she asked for her job back. So it's a really good
It's quite
sign.
amazing retention rate.
Yeah, I think, for us, something like, culture is really, really important to us. And we have, our strong core values internally, where we really want to be, keeping our staff for the long run and investing in them and keeping a happy team, because ultimately that will in turn produce better results for our clients and will help grow the business as we grow globally as well.
Yeah. How would you describe the kind of culture that you're building there?
I'd say it's a vibrant but professional culture. I think, we all work hard together. I think, one of our core values internally is break boundaries together. And what that basically saying is, it's really important that we are, creating campaigns which are winning awards. We won the Digidate Best Influencer Marketing Brand Collaboration. We also won Best Influencer Marketing Platform. But it's about having all those different, internal departments working together to be able to achieve that. And, we have another core value internally, which is don't just follow, influence. And that's really about, us wanting to become the leaders within the influencer industry. Because I don't believe at the moment that there are any necessary leaders. I think there's quite a few players who are doing a very good job. And there's a real opportunity to become that leader. And I really feel that, through educating the market and through pushing the market through with various new insights and things like that, we can really become that on a global scale. So that's really where I see the vision for the company.
Yeah, and in terms of sort of growth as a whole, then have you got? Obviously, you mentioned Kiev. What are your kind of plans for the next?
Yes,
few
we've
years?
actually opened in New York as well. It's still in its infancy, but it's a really, really exciting project for us as we've got quite a few clients who are based over in the States. It became the natural next step, especially with the time zone and managing our creator relationships out there.
Yeah.
So the plan is obviously scaling up New York, and then over the next 12 months, we're doing quite a lot of research into other locations in Europe as well as APAC. For us as well, we just brought on board a venture capitalist who's backed at called Puma Private Equity. And that's really helped us, scale up. We've brought some really experienced people as well within the company. So we brought on a new COO called Jane Loring, who she actually used to be the ex-MD of Mode Media. I don't know if you knew Mode Media, glam.com, which was a real powerhouse within the industry. Probably one of the first ever influencer marketing companies. They actually almost IPO'd for $1 billion, but it was more on celebrity marketing back then.
Right, okay.
It's quite a few years ago. So she's a real powerhouse and there to support the team's growth. Also just hired the agency development lead from Facebook into the team as well. So, some really exciting people joining the company as we scale up.
You mentioned America just then. I was just kind of wondering how does that market differ to the UK when it comes to influencer marketing? How are the sort of audiences different?
So it's certainly much more mature. So obviously being much more mature means that the budget sizes are a lot bigger.
Right.
Test budget in the UK is really around £40,000. Over in the States, it's around £100,000. Right. But with that, there's about 10 times the number of competitors. But if you can crack that market, obviously the reward is much greater. So it's a market which we're really, really excited about, and one which we are confident that we will be able to crack. We just have to be developing the same strategy which we did within the UK and adapting it to the US market. And, we have the utmost confidence that we can be, the powerhouse of influencer marketing on a global scale.
And what's your take on the sort of agency landscape in general when you look from the sort of growing independence in your space, but in kind of other marketing spaces versus the kind of the big networks which are still kind of holding strong? What's your kind of vision for how that's going to develop over the next sort of few years?
Yeah, it's interesting. We actually work with all the main 6 agency groups and our preferred suppliers, within multiple ones within these agency groups. And I think it's really important to develop those relationships because, as we develop our agency relationships, we get exposure to more of the brands that they're working with.
So they're coming to you for obviously your expertise.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, with the type of accounts that we're working on across, globally, we get to understand what works best, and we can use that sort of data to actually improve all of our campaigns that we're running, from doing the Starbucks account in the UK, Germany and France. We can understand how better to do an Alibaba campaign in those regions as well. So I think that's really where we're strengthening ourselves as a business.
Yeah, so you're benefiting by tapping into the scale that those networks have.
I think that's what we're all about, is how best we can scale as a business by almost piggybacking off other companies' scale. And I think that's where we're really developing as a business. And as I said, it's not just about influencer marketing campaigns. It's also about other branded content opportunities where we can, still work with the creators, but reusing their content or just getting them to produce content outright for other forms of marketing too.
Yeah. When it comes to social media marketing that's sort of not the influencer stuff now, where do you think the big opportunity is for brands there in terms of their own social media content, or should they just be thinking almost all about influencer stuff?
I think brands can certainly become influencers themselves on social media. I think it's really dependent on their content strategy. It's about, it's the same sort of principles within influencer marketing. It's about being authentic. But also the most important thing is about being consistent. I guess that stems into authenticity, but too many brands will probably, start building a content strategy, and then after a month, if nothing's changed, they've just decided, nope, giving it up. It hasn't worked, but it takes time. And it's important to be, putting in that effort to actually develop the strategy. And I think, using other influencers and other creators to help amplify their content can certainly develop them as a business. I'd say our public facing brand, although obviously we're a B2B business, is very B2C-esque. But that's often, how you are capable of growing a brand as well.
I guess you're seeing more and more now in the B2B world. You mentioned B2B brands understanding that power of personal brand to grow their businesses, and you guys obviously understand it as well, but it's almost like you could see the influencer marketing thing moving more and more into that space too, I guess.
100%. I mean, personal brands are so important, especially going to be in 2020. I think the type of deals that we get off the back of, all of the talks that we do is incredible, but I think it's just about, stemming on what I sort of keep banging on about educating the industry. It helps amplify the influencer marketing message across multiple advertising themes. I think, Caspar and I have been lucky enough to speak at, Cannes Lion, Web Summit, all these amazing places. And I think it's great that we've had these opportunities for the influencer marketing industry, because we're just basically talking about how incredible this industry is growing, and where the future of the influencer marketing lies.
Yes, you're adding so much value by sharing all that stuff. I guess you personally, what's your favourite part of your role as CEO? Is it going and doing talks, or is it getting involved in the client work, or what is that?
I'd say, for me, it's been incredible to work with people who have become some really good friends. And I think Hester's worked with me for now 3 years and hasn't killed me just yet. But I think that's really interesting for us as, or for me personally. But I think that it's seeing people develop over that time period, which is incredible. And I think for me, the reason why the States is so exciting for us as well is I feel like, we've got to a certain size in the UK, which is going to naturally keep growing, which is great. But I do love that sort of grind attitude where, it's really scaling up again. So that's where the States comes in mind, where it's that real, proper hustle back to, and I'm really excited about that as well.
And how do you keep yourself motivated then? Do you set yourself certain goals that you want to achieve, or how do you tackle that?
I think, keeping yourself motivated comes down to, are you passionate about something, right? And I'm incredibly passionate about the influencer industry, and I'm incredibly passionate about watching peers around me grow as well and develop in their careers. And I think certainly having the team around me that we have, that's a motivation in itself. And because, I want to see them all grow in their careers as well. So I think that's one of my main drivers. Obviously as well, making the family proud, family man.
That's family proud?
Yeah, I think my family is very proud, which is nice. But it's about just, I guess, motivating, because it's great to see other people either happy or growing as well.
Yeah. No, interesting. Well, I just wanted to wrap up with the final 3 questions. Ben, what did you used to believe that you no longer believe in?
So it's quite an interesting one, because I've been asked this question before, and the answer I would say is that failing is bad, right? And I think that's something which we're always taught at school, is that, you shouldn't fail, you can't fail. But I think the importance of failing is allowing you to actually develop as a person. There's a quote by Walt Disney where he basically says that if you fail when you're young, it helps you to better yourself and take failure better in the future, because everyone will fail at some point in their life, and you can't develop as a character unless you make mistakes or make certain failures. So I certainly believe that it's actually important to fail so that you can grow and actually learn.
You say we're kind of indoctrinated through school of, have you passed, have you failed?
It's so true. And it's one of those ones where just because you fail as well, it doesn't mean that you can't do something. It's perhaps looking at it from a different perspective. There's times when I haven't made the right hires, or we haven't adopted the right strategies, but really how you can really test yourself and see what the true character is what your reaction is to that failure. Are you gonna just sit around complaining about why it's failed, or are you gonna learn the lessons from it and ensure that next time you're not gonna make that same mistake again?
Is there a failure which you're kind of most proud of, if that makes sense, which you're most glad that you had?
I mean, probably one when I was right back starting Influencer. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I had absolutely no experience. And I was actually working on my gap year in a sales role doing classified ads back in the day.
Okay.
And I was basically sending money off from what I was earning, selling these classified ads, to a development agency in India.
Right.
And I was basically getting them to produce this platform for me.
Okay.
And literally about 6 months down the line, and bear in mind everyone else was sort of like working on their gap year, saving money to like go traveling, or saving money to, for university and the rest of it. And after this 6 months, the developers just basically turned around to me and were like, I'm really sorry, we can't actually build this platform for you. And I was like, what? What do you mean?
You nearly finished it.
Yeah, I was like, what are you talking about? What do you mean you can't build this platform? They're like, yeah, it's just not, it's not going to work. So I was like, okay, well, look, it's obviously incredibly frustrating, and obviously amongst the perhaps tears and stuff like that, I was like, look, just give me a refund, and then we can learn from that and we can build from it. And they were like, no, I'm sorry. I mean, all the money's been spent on labor, so unfortunately we can't offer you a refund. I was like, what are you talking about? I've been sending all of this money over there and I don't have anything protection. Well, I spoke to some lawyers and they said, yeah, it's going to cost you more than the money you've spent to actually get it back from India. So it's basically just have to bite the bullet. And that's obviously a very tough sort of thing for someone who's 18, 19 at the time, who's managing to earn money to actually spend on something to get no input. Or no end product. But it taught me to be much more cautious when choosing partners and have much more control over things.
Yeah, definitely. So secondly, if this wasn't your mission, what would be?
Really interesting question. I think, for me, I definitely want to be doing something in sustainability. And I think a sustainable fashion line in the future is something which I'm truly passionate about. Actually, before Influencer, I had a clothing company, which actually, I guess, like fueled my fire and energy for social. So I think, that's one element, but I think, I am very, very passionate about social media and influencer marketing. And I think if I wasn't working within the influencer marketing industry, I would still be wanting to work in some form of social element. I think, it was always a dream of mine to work for either Facebook or Google. Mm-hmm. And I'm really passionate about that. I think it's just because it excites me. I think tech excites me, data excites me. I sound like such a nerd, but it's basically, it's the truth. So it's definitely something within that field.
Cool. And finally, if you could recommend one book for members of the Journey Further book club to read, what would it be?
I fear that this book's, could have been said already, but it's How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
That was the very first book that we shared with the community when we didn't really have many members. That was the first book we read.
I mean, it's a book which I've read about 20 times. I mean, it's something which it teaches you so many valuable life lessons, which could just simply be put into practice. I mean, even such a simple lesson like try not to tell people that they're wrong, because the moment you tell someone they're wrong, you're just basically insulting them, and whatever you say afterwards is going to have a negative connotation to it. And it's also about things like, learning, try not to have arguments with someone, because when you have an argument with someone, both parties feel deflated afterwards. Yeah. So it teaches you various life lessons and various ways to get around things, which I think have definitely helped me develop as a person, and probably thankfully develop as a person for people around me.
No, that's an amazing recommendation. I completely agree. Ben, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I honestly really, really appreciate it. It's been awesome.
Thank you.